Claudia, Taiwan showing off its military might during celebrations for its National Day today. Thousands looked on as soldiers marched and tanks rumbled through the streets of Taipei. But growing tensions with China cast a shadow over these festivities. In the past week, Beijing has sent waves of fighter jets into Taiwan's defense zone. More than 150 have flown through. And just yesterday, Chinese President Xi Jinping vowed to achieve a, quote, unification with Taiwan, which Beijing considers a breakaway province despite it being a democratically elected sovereign nation. In a speech today, Taiwan's president did acknowledge the recent tensions, saying, quote, "We will continue to bolster our national defense and demonstrate our determination to defend ourselves in order to ensure that nobody can force Taiwan to take the path China has laid out for us." Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis is with us. He's a senior fellow and military expert for defense priorities and author of The 11th Hour in 2020 America. There's the book. Colonel Davis, China's really been ratcheting it up. I mean, sending so many warplanes, a strong message. Is there a real concern potentially that they're preparing, whether now or a few years from now, to try and invade and retake and take Taiwan?
I think there's a very real possibility. There's nothing like a guarantee or a certainty that there is. But without question, the conditions that would be necessary for China to launch a war are increasing, and their capability is increasing. And with these aircraft that we've seen, not just in the last 2 weeks, but actually all throughout this year, it's a huge, by far, a record number of flights going on. And the primary purpose of those is to show that they're increasing capability to launch coordinated attack that would be necessary for an invasion. And then on the other side of the equation, you have Taiwan actually be more and more independent-minded and moving further away from China as they see how they've treated Hong Kong and Tibet and some of these other places, and who's to blame them for that. But the United States has to be very, very careful that we do what the president of Taiwan suggested, which is to help them defend themselves, but we should not get involved in a war if it comes to that.
They are increasing their military budget by $9 billion, and we back their security. But does that mean that we would get into a war over Taiwan?
It doesn't automatically mean that, but there is a substantial move in Washington here in the last year or so where more and more people are saying we should give express security guarantees. And I understand, why we wouldn't want Taiwan to be taken by China. But we have to make a cold, sober, realistic assessment of whether we could win, and if so, at what cost. And when you do that, you see that the chances of us winning, based on the fact that we would be fighting from about 6,000 miles away, and they from China from 100, and then you look at the array of forces, they have absolutely the highest tactical advantage over us, and we would probably lose. But even if we won, the cost would be astronomical. And the worst possible outcome is that it could go nuclear and just be devastating for our country. We just can't risk it.
So what do you think we should do?
Well, we should continue to do what we have been doing. What we actually do have an agreement to is to help Taiwan defend themselves. It's great that they are adding $9 billion. That's good, but it should have been done a lot longer ago because the Taiwanese have neglected their defense. They're still spending just barely 2% of GDP. While we spend 3.5%, so it should at least be commensurate with that. So they need to spend more, and they need to do it in smarter ways because their readiness has been assessed by numerous groups as being pretty low quality, and they're going to have to take their defense a lot more seriously.
And what do these drills mean, if you can call them drills? Do you see them as basically trying to be a run-through for actually
China expressly calls them a drill, military drills. They do them both in the land or in the air and on the sea. And what these things do is it's not just the number of aircraft, but it's the cooperation, the coordination between you have fighters, you have bombers, you have AWACS type planes, you have cyber type planes, and all these would, some would be taking out air defenses, some would be attacking the ground. So you see a growing level of sophistication that would be necessary. And from the course that they're taking, that's where they would actually launch an invasion from the air anyway, if that's what they were doing. So it's definitely a preparation. It's just unknown whether they're committed to doing it or whether they're just preparing.
Yeah, you mentioned those who are saying that we need to have Taiwan's back even stronger. Let me read you something from the Dispatch that Matthew Kronig and Jeffrey Simoneau just recently wrote, saying, quote, "The United States vows to defend former treaty allies like Japan and South Korea, but it provides only an ambiguous security pledge to Taiwan. The United States should end a policy of ambiguity for Taiwan and make it clear it will be willing to use military force if necessary to repel a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. U.S. allies and partners with militaries capable of operating in the region, such as Japan, Australia, India, Britain, and France, should join in this pledge. Deterrence will be strengthened if China believes an assault on Taiwan would trigger a rupture with the entire free world. Colonel, what if all those nations and the United States did band together and say to China and Beijing, no, this is what's going to happen if you invade Taiwan, step back?
Now, that makes no sense, just bluntly stated, because if you enter into a mutual or into a treaty obligation, like with NATO, that's a mutual defense treaty. And Taiwan is never going to come to our aid. We cannot get into a situation where we risk nuclear war, where American cities or an American aircraft carrier could get sunk only for the benefit of Taiwan. Now, see, I argue that we don't need a military treaty to be able to turn China into a pariah. There's many things we could do diplomatically and economically to make significant pain for China should they do something like that. But to get into a war that we would probably lose, that's just hubris, and we should avoid it at all costs.
Well, we hope Beijing certainly gets the message to keep its hands off Taiwan. Retired Army Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis. Colonel, thank you.
Thank you.
Of course.